Since the announcement of the sequel to Captain Marvel, we've told you here on Valiant Renegade that it was probably going to be a bomb, that it would probably turn in one of the worst box offices in MCU history, or at the very least, wouldn't come anywhere near to the 2019 original Captain Marvel that was given prime real estate 2 months in theaters ahead of Endgame. Well, lo and behold, here we are with a $6.6 million Thursday night preview haul, one of the worst in MCU history, especially when you adjust for the fact that 10, 15 years ago, Thursday previews began at midnight Friday, effectively. Now they begin 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This movie is now expected to hopefully crawl its way to $40 to $45 million if it's very lucky. And the overall box office run will likely signal the death of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Make sure to join us every Sunday afternoon right here on Valiant Renegade at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show. Well, the bad news is rolling in. This from our friend Anthony D'Alessandro at Deadline Magazine, a wonderful source of information for the box office that we have frequently cited here on Valiant Renegade. The Marvels hovers at $6.6 million on a Thursday night as stars make their way to cinemas to post-actor strike box office. Marvel Studios' sequel The Marvels has clocked around $6.5 million in Thursday night previews, and Disney called the night at $6.6 million showtimes that begin at 3 p.m. yesterday. The fear out there by many is that this $200 million budgeted sequel to 2019's Captain Marvel... No. Look, Anthony is not wrong in stating that this was a $200 million budgeted sequel. That was the original budget for this film. But of course, as we've discussed before, budgets are merely an intention of what to spend by a studio. That doesn't mean that's what they ultimately spend on the picture. What they've actually spent on the Marvels, as best we can calculate, is probably going to approach, if not exceed, $300 million because, as we've noted many times before leading into this opening weekend, the Marvels was shanked back in earlier this year, around March and February, when Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania opened. They delayed it. It was supposed to come out in July. They moved it to November and took the November release of Haunted Mansion and switched places to July. Why? Because of massive reshoots. This movie, The Marvels, failed miserably with test audiences, and they had to go back and redo it. And of course, if you've watched the movie like I have, you can clearly see where these reshoots were shoehorned in. They look and feel radically different from what is ostensibly the original footage for the film and the original finished CGI. It's a hot mess, and this movie is going to have to make probably somewhere around $800 to $900 million at the box office just to break even, and it's not going to come anywhere close to that. Anthony continues that movie stands as the highest grossing female superhero movie of all time. And again, that's for good reasons, because it was billed as a you've got to go see it movie before Endgame, which was the biggest movie of all time at the box office, next to, say, Avatar. But this movie could actually clock the lowest start ever stateside for a Marvel movie, lower than The Incredible Hulk, which was a Universal release before Disney absorbed the MCU, which had a $55.4 million start, while Tracking took its projections down from $80 million to $60 million for the Marvels. There is a concern out there that the Marvels could see a $40+ million start. Let's go back to October 12th. On Box Office Pro, the Marvel's initial tracking for this, after the first week of ticket pre-sales, the opening weekend range that Box Office Pro was looking at, $50 to $75 million. a lot more subdued than the initial $80 million from places like Deadline and Variety magazine. And then on November 8th, the same day as the Walt Disney Company earnings call that we covered live right here on Valiant Renegade, the Marvels had been readjusted down on Box Office Pro with an opening weekend of $35 to $49 million. That means the entire range had absolutely collapsed underneath the low end of the initial projection just a few weeks earlier on October 12th, which the bottom end, of course, was $50 million. It's very unusual to see a box office collapse in their initial projections week over week ahead of release that hard. That means that all of the interest that was pushing that $50 to $75 million gauge that Box Office Pro initially gave us on October 12th was largely front-loaded in ticket pre-sales, which is something I said I thought was exactly the case just about a week or two ago right here. Back to Deadline at 6.5 million in Thursday previews. That's one of the lower numbers we've seen in recent times for Marvel. Just one notch above Ant-Man, the original Ant-Man from, a decade ago now, and lower than Disney November misfires The Eternals, 9.5 million in previews, with a $71.2 million opening. And of course, everybody loved The Eternals, right? Then there was Thor, Dark World, 7.1 million in previews with an $85.7 million open. Again, we're talking about a movie that was nearly 10 years ago, where ticket prices were almost half of what they are today. And The Incredible Hulk has the lowest previews at 2 million for an MCU title in the preview era, but that's when previews began at midnight. That was also one of the first MCU titles ever back in 2008. Advanced ticket sales of 5 million indicated the Marvels was flying into the Flash's territory opening-wise. However, the Flash's preview figure was higher at $9.7 million off of showtimes that began at 3 p.m. Thursday. Now, that right there is the best comparison, and let me tell you why. Not only is Flash the most recent example that lines up with the Marvels in terms of what should be the intended audience. However, I believe it was not in the case of Marvel. 5 million in advanced ticket pre-sales for each, right? But The Flash turned in nearly 50% higher return at the gate on Thursday night previews than did the Marvels when they both opened around the same time of day. What made the difference? Well, that would have to be walk-up traffic. That means that the Marvels ticket pre-sales were extraordinarily front-loaded, even more so than The Flash. To put it another way, anybody that had any interest in seeing the Marvels, almost all of them bought tickets in advance, and none of them walked up due to word of mouth to go watch this film last night. Critical reviews on RT are 61% fresh, but the RT audience score is higher at 85, which is promising. However, the diehards always come out on Thursday night. Thursday night post-track exits from ComScore and Screen Engine were severe for general audiences at 3.5 stars, but 4.5 stars from parents and 5 stars from kids under 12. But that said, kids and parents combined only repped 9% of last night's audience. The Marvels skewed guys at 63%, with men over 25, the biggest turnout at around 45%, and women over 25 at 24%. That latter demographic gave the best recommendation grades of any demo at 61%. Just think about that demographic for a second. This is a movie that Marvel Studios clearly made for women, with 3 female leads in this film. A female director that, let's be honest, Nia DaCosta herself even said this really wasn't her movie. This was a Kevin Feige movie, as she spilled the beans in a recent interview that we covered. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I am not even going to hold Nia DaCosta responsible for this movie, because we know how Marvel Studios works with Kevin Feige. He is the one controlling everything, and he brings in writers and directors to basically be ornaments. And where are the women? Why are the guys repping the overwhelming majority of this movie? The women aren't even interested. What does that tell you, Marvel? Now, women don't tend to front load into movies nearly as much as guys tend to do. So if women actually show up more over the weekend, this movie could leg out to higher degrees than what they're expecting now, maybe getting closer to 50 million. But I'm just not seeing it. But let's look at this Rotten Tomatoes score. 61% on the critic score. That is about double what it was a day ago. So all of the pixie duster critics are coming in. But as we've told people before, you have to look at the deviation between top critics and all critics. Let's take a look at that. So here's your all critic score. Currently stands at 61% with 223 reviews. But if we go to top critics, and again, these are the critics that are hand-selected by a committee that runs Rotten Tomatoes. These are supposed to be the critics that are beyond reproach, have the most experience, that are the creme de la creme. They have given the Marvels a flat-out rotten score of 42%, and this has not budged all that much. This was hovering in the mid-30% range just yesterday. But you know what's also very curious to me? Is that audience score. Only 250 verified ratings so far to push this thing to 85%. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually by the time we get to a Friday afternoon, following at least 24 hours or so of a Marvel film's release, which is about where we are right now, we would see far, far more verified audience scores on this number. 250 is extremely low. Usually by this point, that number says 1,000 plus verified ratings. It's not. And what that tells me is that those pixie dusters out there are really the only ones going to see this film. We can see this reflected in the box office. It's not just about the score itself. It's about how many reviews have clocked in up to this point. And there are so few showing you just how much lack of interest there is in this movie. And then, of course, the real reviews out there have not been terribly kind. The Marvels. The Marvel Cinematic Universe disappears up its own black hole. This from the Irish Times. I guess. Or how about the guys at Night Watch and our friend Shad Brooks over there? The Marvels is explosive diarrhea posing as a film. Now, of course, stuff like this tends to anger the, well, let's call them shills out there. The folks like Scotty Mendelson, formerly of Forbes magazine. The Marvels earned just $6.6 million in Thursday previews, positioning the film for an under $50 million opening weekend. Once again, big thanks to everybody who waited to diversify their superhero franchises until right before the subgenre stopped being an automatic event. Scott has been whining about this now for the past, 6 months to a year or beyond. And as we keep reminding folks, we really don't have to because you folks out there already know this, it has nothing to do with superhero fatigue. If another great Spider-Man film came out tomorrow, it's going to do over $1 billion. The problem is that the rest of the Disney-branded Marvel stuff, not the Sony-branded Marvel stuff, but the Disney-branded Marvel stuff, has generally been poorly written, poorly executed, and just, well, poorly received by audiences, at least insofar as phases 4 and 5. Nothing is changing with the Marvels. If anything, it's gotten worse. The problem is not the diversity of characters, or at least the diversity of their skin colors or ethnic backgrounds, which shouldn't mean a damn thing to anybody. It doesn't. The problem is they're just poorly written characters that are in uninteresting movies, and they're characters that nobody really knows about or cares about. And Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige, frankly, have given audiences no reason to care about these characters. Now, of course, a lot of people are chiming in on this one and kicking back at Scotty with diversity is the problem. Great, Scott. No, and Scotty responds, the problem is that the film, as it exists, would have been much bigger of a hit years ago, but we spent 90% of the superhero boom centering them on white guys named Chris. Give me a freaking break, Scott. Those characters were charismatic and well received by everybody, not just other white guys, but lots of women as well. And lots of people, men and women out there, and kids all around the globe of all different ethnic backgrounds and skin colors. So I don't want to hear it. No mention of the success of the first Captain Marvel movie, regardless of it too being a terrible film because of where it was placed in the lineup. No mention by Scott of, say, Black Panther from back in 2018, which was very well received by quite a lot of folks. No, this is all just Scott grumbling now because his Brie Larson movie is not doing what he hoped it would. The movie isn't good, Scott. Gotta include that as part of this outcome. Scott's response? That wouldn't have mattered in 2016. So Scott basically thinks that the audiences were stupid and nothing would have mattered back then. Yeah, well, I get the fact that a lot of people went to go see the first Captain Marvel in 2019, but that's because, again, that's where it was positioned. It was positioned as a you got to go see it ahead of Endgame. But the fact of the matter is, audiences still responded very poorly to that film, even though they paid to go see it. And like I've told folks a lot of times before, Scott, if Marvel and Disney had paid attention to merchandise sales instead of ticket sales to these Marvel properties, particularly with Captain Marvel, they would have damn well known not to make a sequel to that. The fact of the matter is, there was nothing leading into this movie to get people excited. And this movie was not leading into anything directly after it to get people excited. So now what you're seeing is the Captain Marvel character and her two new cohorts standing alone out there in the darkness because nobody knows or cares who they are. Ms. Marvel was one of the lowest watched shows on Disney Plus in its history, at least for a big Marvel enterprise, if not the lowest. Disney and Marvel got so desperate they had to throw in a cheap X-Men hat tip there in a post-credit scene. Also, something that probably largely means nothing because I don't even think Disney bringing back the X-Men and the Fantastic Four right now is going to save it. It's so dead, they're going to have to let it rest for several years. And frankly, I think Disney is probably very lucky. The only thing that they've decided to put out next year is Deadpool 3. That may be the only movie that's actually immune to what they've done to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the last 2 years. Get ready, folks, because Disney is going to lose probably over $200 million on this dumpster fire. And this is something of their own making. They can't blame anybody else, and they damn sure shouldn't blame Nia DaCosta. She was thrown into a situation that she frankly was not equipped to handle, not because she's incapable, but because she was inexperienced. She had only done some very small independent films. Good ones from what I hear, but nothing on the scale of Marvel. And of course, Nia DaCosta was kind of set to the side. This was a Kevin Feige movie. This was going to happen the way it happened, whether she was involved or not, which is a shame for her sake. So when you're looking at this movie and you're deciding to point fingers, make sure you point them squarely at Kevin Feige and the Walt Disney Company. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.